Ontar's log, 14th day of Gainado, 2,000 years after sunfall. Another day passes in Ev-Ejdahala, the capital of the empire. For me, it wasn't actually so bad of a day. I can't say the same for some others who reside here, but I'll get to all of that soon enough. Before that, though, I must say I am terribly excited for the big game. If there's one thing Dragonborn do well, it's competition. I just hope Balazar isn't involved in this one. Not for his sake, but for that of his opponents. Only time will tell, I suppose. Anyways, let's recap the last session. Upon the parties reuniting yesterday afternoon, we proceeded to go shopping at an outdoor market in Buyuk Uluslu. Tebby went on looking for a journal, Micah some new clothes, and Cambram and I a set of handcrafted, fully natural arrows. Balazar, uninterested in shopping, went off clam fishing with a shark, and Rogar, well, he just went and did that follow people around and stay quiet thing that he does sometimes. Probably plotting something sinister, honestly. He did just get all those new powers after all. Anyways, Tebby, upon finding a journal to her liking, was informed that the binding was leather from a cow. The Minotaur was mortally offended by this, nearly breaking down into tears. The seller, rather unconvincingly, quickly said that it was a cow at the end of her peaceful, happy life. Whether or not Tebby had the insight to see through this is beyond me, but she bought the journal anyway. Micah found himself a great deal, able to have his torn and bloodied garments mended and get a new set for a great price I can't seem to remember. Cambram and I spent some time searching for this incredible dwarven merchant whom the Warforged had known for years. The dwarf was an odd fellow, but he did have a very interesting stand. He brought out 3 sets of arrows for me to choose from, but unfortunately each were painfully unnatural. Perhaps it was the city wearing down on me, perhaps it was the unintelligible arcana inscribed on the shafts, but either way, it just didn't feel right. So after Cambram got a new ingredient for his soups from the dwarf, we were soon on our way. While leaving, Cambram very bluntly informed me of the threat of Balkos. It came as no surprise, but I did my best to be politely shocked. We then reconvened with Tebby, Rogar, and Micah, scaring a scam artist out of his wits and being on our merry way. As we walked, Micah asked if anyone wanted to have coffee with him the next morning. I really am not a coffee person myself, but seeing as no one else spoke up, I happily offered to go along. Balazar, meanwhile, was swimming off the docks in search of clams and their precious pearls. He enlisted the help of a shark, denied that of a boat, and walked away with an armful of clams. Unfortunately for the barbarian, when he came up out of the water, his bag and belongings had been stolen. For any normal person, this would come as no surprise, for the Dragonborn had left the bag unattended on the dock practically for hours. But then again, a normal person would likely be quite distraught over it. Balazar just shrugged and moved on. Heading northwest, Cambram, Tebby, Micah, and Rogar were on their way to bed for the evening. Rogar, though, in his unending but uncontrollable power, granted the 4 of them, plus a random stranger, dark vision. It was quite an experience, especially for Micah, who found it beautiful, and the random stranger, who had no idea what was going on. Rogar then accidentally also gave himself true sight, and began seeing a multitude of previously invisible horrors all around him. Worst of these was an enormous, incredibly terrifying face on top of a building. When Rogar pointed it out, it looked straight at him, angrily of course. Micah, being a supremely curious fellow, teleported up onto the roof to try and touch the invisible face. Cambram, I suppose also feeling curious in that moment, proceeded to teleport himself onto the roof as well. An important distinction between Micah and Cambram is that Micah weighs, probably 140, 150 or something, while Cambram on the other hand weighs a literal ton. So, when he magically teleported onto the roof, it immediately collapsed and the Warforged fell right in. The 4 ended up taking some notes and deciding to return to the house at a later date to further investigate the face and apologize for the broken roof. Later that night, I actually ran into Balazar on my way to the closed grotto. He was holding a bunch of clams in his arms, still dripping from his swim. I tried to find him something to carry them in, to no avail. So he went on his way, eager to meet with Oithis, the green dragon of the treasury. The dragon gave him a special cloak and some information, though what Balazar understood, I cannot be sure. We all went to bed that night in our separate places and slept fairly soundly for the most part. In the morning, I was feeling quite out of touch. Rangers are to be the bridge between civilization and nature, and I had been getting far too much of the former this last week spent in the capital. I searched around for a tree, some shrubbery, anything natural, really, and proceeded to make myself look like even more of a stranger than I already did to the local populace. "Well, what about that giant tree right over there?" they say. "Well, why don't I bring you somewhere you will be instantaneously murdered?" I wanted to respond, but I kept my mouth shut like a good ranger and found my way to the river, which was the closest I was going to get to nature for the time being. Meanwhile, up in the religious district, Cambram went off to find Nicholas upon Micah's request, and the wizard went off with Tebby to Frodrin's library, much to the Minotaur's display, I might add. Tebby has something against Micah and I, and the library incident wasn't about to make that any better. Micah wanted to learn more about the Empire's culture, hopefully contradicting her understanding that it is barbaric and of poor morals. Tebby proudly went on to confirm this assessment in strong terms, though audibly showcased her dismay for the wizard. Eventually, the two got into a heated argument, ending with Tebby pointing out a lie of Micah's and Micah nearly burning down the library in his emotion. Micah then stormed out of the building right past Cambram and Nicholas. The wizard, at least trying to be slightly more polite, turned around, told them where to find the injured man who needed a new leg, and went on his way. Cambram and Nicholas found the man, a petty thief turned follower of Ludric, with Rogar. The Warforged, in his unending wisdom, then subjected the man to his enhanced interrogation techniques to find out if he deserved the prosthetic leg. An hour of verbal and emotional torture later, he deemed the man worthy, but barely. So Nicholas began his work. Out by the bridge, I was sitting contentedly, playing my flute and spending time with Garvin, my raven companion, until suddenly Micah stormed onto the scene. He was a little late for coffee, but I wasn't about to bring that up, as Micah was clearly fuming. We discussed many things, including the incident with Tebby, my recent disconnection with nature, and the order of which I'm a part of. Meanwhile, off in Ludric's temple, the legless follower of the sun god was feeling its glorious heat sear into his flesh. The man was now being subjected to physical torture to finish out Cambram's torturous trifecta, as the prosthetic leg was being attached. Rogar, playing Crowd's man, ensured that there was no need to worry. The blood-curdling screaming was only because the man's blood was being curdled for good reason. Balazar looked on as only Balazar can, and thankfully the man was eventually freed from his pain. Finally, after our meeting, Micah left to attend another meeting with a woman he did not know in a district he had never been in. Luckily, though, after a close encounter with a family pet, the wizard found his place. I await writing more on this until that meeting is concluded. Speaking of, this concludes Ontar's log, February 6th, 2021.